what does a scene always have to have in it? Like, what are the elements in the scene? Because you're right, so many times people are just like, so how are you doing? Oh, I'm doing fine. How is that going? And they're like, it's like, no, that's not why we watch a movie, to watch real life. That's called a documentary. What should a scene do, and what elements should be in every scene in your script?
God, I wish I knew. But I will say this, I mean, drama's conflict, right? Somebody
Sure.
somebody should want something, and they probably should, and I wouldn't say always, but oftentimes be going up against somebody else who, doesn't want them to have it, right? That's kind of how you fuel it. But I think, some scenes are more character oriented. They're telling you something more about the person, particularly in the first act, when you're getting the lay of the land. Some scenes are really just kind of moving the plot along, and we know who these people are by now. You want to be consistent with who they are. But this is what's tricky about it, right? Because you can't really totally boil it down to a formula.
No.
It's the prototype every time out, right? And that's why even people like Sidney Pollack, have their hits and their misses. It's just it's intangible in a way, But in general, you want to be moving things forward. You don't want to be repeating yourself. And you want the story to be building as you go. And you want there to be something at stake that people care about, or understand at least what it means to the protagonist, and that you care about whether or not they get it. Because if you don't care, then the whole thing is moot, right?
Right.
That's kind of fundamental.
So then what film, in your opinion, has, as an example, like a perfect setup, structurally speaking? Great.
There's quite a number of them, because I know this because I teach them in my class. And I don't have anything that's really brand new, but, I try to get to newer things. But Tootsie is genius.
Mm-hmm.
But, Tootsie's like, I don't know, 8 writers on that.
Yeah, there was
Plus
a bunch
Sydney.
of...
Right? I mean, credited it's not, but like Elaine May was uncredited on that. Larry Gelbart was on that. Murray Schiskell, who was the guy who came up with it with Dustin, and then there were at least 3 or 4 others. I wasn't working for Sydney at the time, but, I'm aware at least 3 or 4 others that, he worked with, plus Sydney, who never took a writing credit, but worked very closely, with people developing scripts. So that's how hard it is. Right? This is how challenging this craft is. You got all those people at the top of their game, and it took them years. That thing did not happen overnight. I think that thing was in development at least 3 or 4 years before. And when they first pitched it to Sydney, when Dustin and I guess Murray Siskel first pitched it to Sydney, he's like, and he'd not done comedy, right? In fact, I think that's his only comedy, and it's really a shame because it's such genius. But he felt like, I don't really do farce. And it's great. I would go see it. If Blake Edwards did it, I'd go see it. But I don't know a way into it. A guy putting on a dress. And apparently in one of those meetings, somebody said something about, how it makes a man out of Michael. Like being a woman makes a man out of Michael. And that was what Sydney latched onto thematically. That was what was interesting.
And I'm assuming that's a difficult pitch. Like that at that time in history as well, it must have been a difficult pitch.
Yeah, Dustin, and he was a pretty big star,
he was huge, yeah.
And he really wanted to make it, and he really wanted to play it. There was something about playing that character he really sunk his teeth into. But that was the thing that made it interesting for Sydney. It was sort of the larger thematic question that he could explore there. But Toy Story is also masterclass in structure.
Well, pretty much almost every one of their movies is a masterclass in structure. I mean, you could argue. Not all of them.
I'm going to be unpopular here and say that I'm not as big a fan of the Pixar movies as I used to be, because this is just me. Mm-hmm. I don't think they're as funny as they used to be. I think they've gotten very sentimental and
they are.
And I miss the wit, and I don't know if that's just a function that most of the guys, and they are guys, almost all guys, and maybe there's some women now, but who made the bulk of those movies have gotten older. I don't know whether that's just easier and safer, commercially speaking. It is easier, I think, to sort of push those sentimental buttons than it is to be genuinely witty and inspired, especially when you're kind of working on almost like Shakespearean level where you're aiming at kids and adults and everybody in between. But I just think the original Toy Story is genius and so funny and ultimately so touching. But I mean, the idea that Buzz has this existential crisis when he realizes he's not a space ranger. I mean, that right there is just the best things ever in a movie. And it's fantastic too, because it's a fantastic character arc, because that's his epiphany. That's the moment that they're able to escape Sid. You see the light go on in his eyes. He finally realizes, it's okay not to be a space ranger. He's cool with being Andy's toy.
And isn't it great in the sequel where he actually runs into another Buzz Lightyear who still has that same thing? He's like, "Oh, you silly, silly man." I mean,
yeah. But, The King's Speech is another one that really hits those marks. Sideways really hits those marks. A lot of them. You'd be surprised. In my opinion, pretty much any really successful, commercially, critically, solid movie, you can go through that checklist and identify for yourself those beats. Again, unless it's something very different, like Charlie Kaufman or,
Tarantino stuff.
Yeah, yes, exactly. We've got that loopy structure and stuff, which is genius too. But I think even in that, you can identify inciting incidents and stuff.
Oh, yeah.
That's
Yeah, you break Pulp Fiction down and it follows the path, but it's done.
Sure it does. The way it's, yeah.
Oh, it's so, but
any of those
literally
movies that jump around in time that way, like 500 Days of Summer or yeah. They're hitting those marks, but they're doing it in a way that it's like, it
hurts the brain. It hurts the brain to think about how.